Good afternoon, everyone. To those who are watching us on the Facebook as well as on this platform. In these series, we have been taking issues wherein what a lawyer ought to know and what lawyers can sharpen up their skills by chiseling it by the knowledge of the experts. As after the ordinance in the Arbitration Act, this fraud, etc., came more into limelight. Taking into this consideration, we requested Advocate Ajay J. Nandaleke to give the insights on fraud and arbitration, tumultuous decade. As we all know, that the common thread running between the various judgments is to the effect that fraud vitiates everything. And we also believe that and know that in the arbitration, it is a summary proceedings. And normally we say that the fraud normally cannot be examined in a summary procedure. But is it so, or what is the journey ahead in this regard, more specifically in the Arbitration Act? And as we have seen that alternate dispute redressal systems, that is the areas, have been much talked about and discussed. Consequently, taking into this consideration, as I referred earlier, we requested Ajay, who is a renowned lawyer on the aspects of arbitration. And he was kind enough, despite the fact that he had a busy schedule, to give the insights regarding the new ordinance and what is the legal journey meaning thereby the case law, how it has developed specifically under the Arbitration Act. He has also kindly acceded to our request to share the judgments which we will be discussing during this webinar. Without taking much time, since I know that we are all now into the virtual and physical courts pan India. And immediately after the session, the courts, we all go into the offices. So without taking much time, I would request Ajay to take over the baton and show us the lights. Over to you, Ajay.
Thank you, Vikas. Hello, everybody. Wishing everybody a very good afternoon. So I wanted to first of all thank Vikas for the opportunity because as a Karnataka lawyer, it's really a great pleasure to interact with lawyers across the country and understand and know their viewpoints as well. So I'm going to talk about fraud and arbitration, and I've termed it a tumultuous decade. Now, before I get into this entire thing, I want to tell you that I will be talking about 3 events. And then I'm going to draw a connection between the 3 events. So the first of these was on 7th of January 2009, when one Ramalinga Raju, he wrote a letter. And that letter sent shockwaves across the world and especially in India. That's one event. Another event was when Dr. S. Radhakrishnan became the chairperson of ISRO on 29th of October 2009. And on 22nd of October 2009, when the Supreme Court decided Radhakrishnan versus Maestro Engineers. So all these 3 events took place in 2009, and I'm going to draw a connection between them to trace the journey of arbitration and fraud. So let's go to the last one first. Radhakrishnan versus Maestro Engineers. So the story starts in Coimbatore. Coimbatore is a place in Tamil Nadu where there was a partnership firm called Maestro Engineers. Now, what this Maestro Engineers partnership firm did was it carried out a series of engineering services. Radhakrishnan was a partner there, and he had some disputes with his other partners. He said that you guys are pilfering money, you guys are carrying out malpractices, you're fudging accounts, you're driving out my clients. Please allow me to retire and pay me my capital contribution. My capital contribution is 2.7 lakhs. Please pay me the money and I'll be off. And he said that, and then the partnership firm said, sorry, you are a partner, yes, but your capital contribution is only 1 lakh and we are not guilty of any malpractices, so we are not going to do what you ask. He then issued a notice saying that within 15 days, if you don't take steps to ensure my retirement from the firm and settle my capital contribution, I will initiate arbitration. Now, what this partnership firm did was it sought for a declaration that Radhakrishnan is not a partner in the partnership firm and consequently sought for an injunction restraining him from participating in the affairs of the firm. Now, Radhakrishnan came, he filed an application under Section 8 of the Arbitration Act. Section 8 of the Arbitration Act said that if the subject matter of the suit is covered under an arbitration agreement, the court shall refer the matter to arbitration. He, in a Section 8 application, made allegations that these people have fraudulently taken me out, they have, I am still a partner, and so on and so forth. The partnership firm took three essential defenses. First, it said that because he is no longer a partner in the partnership firm, you cannot refer the matter to arbitration because the arbitration agreement under the partnership deed would not apply to him, as he has already retired. Second thing it said is that he did not file the original partnership deed along with the Section 8 application, and he only filed a photocopy. So therefore, you cannot refer it because Section 8 subclause 2 is not satisfied. The third argument which they took is that he is making allegations of fraud and misappropriation. Now, these allegations of fraud and misappropriation cannot be gone into in an arbitration proceedings. Why it cannot be gone into in an arbitration proceedings is because it is essentially summary procedure. Now, they relied on a Madras High Court judgment to this effect. Now, there is a saying that, the son is blamed for the sins of the father. So the 1940 Arbitration Act had a section 20. Under Section 20, one had to file a suit for referring the matter to arbitration. So in that suit, the court had a discretion whether to refer the matter to arbitration. The court would look into whether the dispute contemplated is under the arbitration, so on and so forth, series of criteria. So the Madras High Court held, relying on its own judgment, another judgment saying that no, it's a summary procedure and we are not going to allow you to refer the matter to arbitration. Matter came up to Supreme Court. In Supreme Court, the judgment of Abdul Khadir versus Madhav Oak, it's a 1962 three-judge bench judgment, that was argued, and that was a case where in a similar partnership firm, there was a proposition which was laid down that if an argument is made and the Supreme Court found favor in it. And the Supreme Court laid down a proposition that where there are allegations of fraud, the matter should not be referred to arbitration and cannot be referred to arbitration because arbitration is a summary procedure. Now, this was the grossest misreading of the judgment of Abdul Khadir versus Madhav Oak, because if one were to read the judgment, it says that the option of seeking the matter to be fought in open court is on the party against whom the allegation of fraud is made. Now, in this case, the party against whom the allegation of fraud was made was Maestro Engineers. So, Maestro Engineers cannot take advantage of its own fraud to say that I want the matter to be referred to arbitration. I don't want the matter to be referred to arbitration. And if one reads further down, the Supreme Court went into the allegations which were made. The allegations were that of misappropriation and forging the accounts books, etc. Somewhat similar allegations to what was made in Maestro Engineers case as well. And the Supreme Court held that these are not allegations which require the matter to be referred to arbitration. So therefore, a judgment was incompletely read and a proposition was laid down that if an allegation of fraud is made, the matter cannot be referred to arbitration. This is where our journey begins. And what then started happening is lawyers started citing allegations of fraud. They would just say fraud. I mean, to make a joke out of it, a dog fraudulently ate my homework. If you just say that, then the matter cannot be referred to arbitration because you use the word fraud. What is really a test of what is the extent of fraud that would determine whether the dispute is arbitrable or not? Unfortunately, this was not there, and repeatedly matters would get refused to be referred to arbitration, and Section 8 became a difficult exercise. At this point in time, we take our journey to Bombay. There was a company called Booz Allen and Hamilton. Now, this is a US defense contractor who specializes in surveillance, and there are several controversies in the US relating to it. Now, what had happened in 1996-97 is in a place called Nepean Sea Road on Malabar in South Bombay, which is a very posh area, this company had taken 2 flats on lease. The persons from whom it had taken the flats on lease, let's call them A and B for convenience. Now, these 2 persons had taken actually a loan from SBI and had mortgaged the property to SBI. So the leave and license agreement was entered into with the State Bank of India as a confirming party. And that agreement essentially said that the entire deposit amount of 6.5 crore at that point in time, which is a huge sum, was given to SBI. Now, out of this A and B, B did not make good on its loan installments. A was the guarantor. What SBI did was SBI filed a suit. And in that suit, SBI sought for enforcement of its mortgage. It sought for a declaration that A is liable to pay, and that if A doesn't pay in default, B must pay. And the last prayer was evict Booz Allen Hamilton so that it can effectively enforce the mortgage. Now, Booz Allen Hamilton filed an application under Section 8 and sought the matter to be referred to arbitration. Now, when Booz Allen sought the matter to be referred to arbitration, the matter came up before the High Court held against Booz Allen Hamilton, and ultimately the matter came up to Supreme Court. In Supreme Court, the Justice Ravindran beautifully traced the concept of arbitrability. Concept of arbitrability was traced to Section 34(2)(b) subclause 2, which reads that an award can be set aside if the subject matter of the dispute is incapable of settlement by arbitration under the laws of India. So therefore, if the subject matter is not capable of adjudication by arbitration, then it becomes inarbitrable. So here Justice Ravindran traced the concept of arbitrability. He said that there are 3 types of arbitrability. First type of arbitrability is if a dispute cannot be adjudicated in a private fora, and it has to be necessarily adjudicated in a public fora. It involves right in rem. It involves certain other types of disputes like matrimonial, insolvency, succession. And he also said that disputes which are arising out of facts which also give rise to a criminal offense. So if the facts of the dispute give rise to a criminal offense as well, then the matter could not be arbitrable. So then you read Radhakrishnan in juxtaposition with Booz Allen. The conclusion that you arrive at is that, yes, if the matter cannot be, if there is a criminal angle to it, and if you even file a criminal case saying that these facts are giving rise to a criminal case, then automatically the matter cannot be referred to arbitration. So because of this judgment, the interpretation of these 2 judgments, it became very commonplace for lawyers to avoid arbitration agreement by either doing one of 2 things or both, either filing a criminal case or in the alternative to raise allegations of fraud and file a suit. And in the suit, you will try to revoke the arbitration clause. And when you try to revoke the arbitration clause, Radhakrishnan will come in the way of that. So this is how it was proceeding. Now we shift to Delhi. In Delhi, what happened is, you are aware of the Commonwealth Games scam. So basically the allegation there was that the Commonwealth Games organizing committee had entered into a series of contracts without proper tender, and in order to make unlawful gains to themselves, CBI had been involved and several people had been charge sheeted. One of the contracts which were involved in this controversy was relating to a company called Swiss Timing, which had supplied various timers which were used for the purpose of recording the time of all these athletic events. So now what happened here is that a Section 11 application came to be filed before a single judge in the Supreme Court. In an international commercial arbitration, everybody is aware that Supreme Court retains jurisdiction, and if you want appointment of an arbitrator in an international commercial arbitration, you'll file a Section 11 directly in the Supreme Court. So accordingly, people filed a Section 11 in the Supreme Court. Now, in the Section 11 in the Supreme Court, Radhakrishnan was cited and said, look, there is a CBI case which is registered. There's a criminal case. When there's a criminal case, and if the very award of the contract itself is based out of fraud, then how can you allow an appointment of an arbitrator in such a situation? Supreme Court saw Radhakrishnan and it said, sorry, Radhakrishnan is per incuriam. Now, how per incurium? Supreme Court referred to two judgments. One was the judgment of 2003 in Hindustan Petroleum versus Pink City Midway Petroleum. Now, what had happened in that case is Pink City had filed a suit under a dealer saying that HPCL, which is Hindustan Petroleum, could not take action against any irregularities which may have been committed by Pink City, because whatever irregularities that were being complained by Hindustan Petroleum were actually subject matter of Standards and Weights and Measures Act. So therefore, those alleged violations of the agreement were also offenses under the Standards and Weights and Measures Act, which involve penal consequences. So therefore, only criminal action can be initiated. There cannot be two parallel proceedings, one civil and one criminal, in respect of the same set of facts or the same breach. Supreme Court under Justice Santosh Hegde had held in 2003, saying that both are independent and distinct. They have no connection with each other. The language of Section 8 is mandatory. It says if the subject matter of the dispute before the court is subject matter of the arbitration agreement, the court shall refer the matter to arbitration. So it's mandatory. And it referred to Anand Gajpati Raju's case, where also the Supreme Court had held that the word shall is mandatory and the court has no discretion. So if the court does not have any discretion, then how can it refer the matter to arbitration? Now, this judgment of Swiss timing, which held that Radhakrishnan is per incurium, was also being cited. Wherever someone would cite Radhakrishnan, someone else would cite Swiss challenge. Now, in 2015, the Supreme Court in State of West Bengal versus Associated Contractors held that an order which is passed under Section 11 of the Arbitration Act is not a binding precedent, because a court exercising jurisdiction under Section 11 is not a court under Section 21E of the Arbitration Act. So effectively, that argument which was sought to be raised, and this ultimately culminated in a judgment in 2016, which I'll come to. The argument was that Section 11 order of in Commonwealth Games and Swiss timing, it doesn't apply. But there was a lot of confusion. People would cite this way, people would cite that way, and there was no real clarity as to how to go forward. Now, the ill effects of Radhakrishnan was well known and well documented throughout the country and even internationally. So the Law Commission which sat, the 246th Law Commission, which that the arbitral tribunal is capable of looking into issues of fraud and other aspects while deciding the dispute. By saying so, you are effectively saying that the dispute becomes arbitrable and the arbitrator has the jurisdiction to do it. The legislature did not do so. The legislature said, no, let us just amend Section 8. So it amended Section 8. How did it amend Section 8? It said, notwithstanding any judgment of the Supreme Court or the High Court, the court shall refer the matter to arbitration unless and until it finds prima facie that there is no arbitration agreement. So it reversed the burden of proof. See, all judgments prior to the amendment were focusing on whether the agreement was, whether there is an arbitration agreement or not. The court had to give a finding. Here, the court had to give a finding that there is, unless and until it prima facie finds that there is no arbitration agreement, the court has to refer the matter to arbitration. Now, in Swiss timing, the question of arbitrability was not gone into. How the judge arrived at it is, he said, please look at Section 16. The arbitrator has the jurisdiction to decide his own arbitrability. Please look at Section 5, which says minimum amount of judicial intervention. Please look at Section 8. So he arrived at a holistic interpretation of Section 5, 8, and 16. Now, he did not look at Section 34, subsection 2, subsection Roman small 2b, because if he had looked at that, then the subject matter, whether if there's a criminal offense involved, and if the criminal offense and civil offense, can it run parallelly? Would it violate the fundamental policy of India? That question he did not answer. And we will come back to this issue again. So now, the situation that we are at is Section 8 is amended. So the language says, unless and until you prima facie find that there is no arbitration agreement, you have to refer the matter to arbitration. So it should logically follow that Even if I allege fraud, even if I make allegations of fraud, doesn't matter. The moment there's an arbitration agreement, you have to refer the matter to arbitration. That would be the interpretation that should ideally follow. But there was a lot of confusion regarding that. And this got cleared in the 2016 judgment of Ayaswamy versus Paramasivan. Now, what happened in Ayaswamy versus Paramasivan was it's again a judgment from Tamil Nadu, where in Tirunelveli, which is another small town in Tamil Nadu, there was a hotel and there were disputes between the partners of that hotel. So the disputes between the partners of that hotel resulted in some criminal case here and there. So 45 lakhs was found in the house of one person. He said it belongs to the partnership, and the CBI wanted to inquire into it, and ultimately it culminated in a suit, whole bunch of dirty proceedings, and a suit was filed and a Section 8 application was filed. Now, in the Section 8 application, Swiss timing was cited. Two beautiful judgments came out in that judgment, and those two judgments have defined how fraud needs to be looked at, and they are very critical and important judgments. One was a judgment of Justice Sikri, another was a judgment of Justice Chandrachud. Now, bear in mind that Radhakrishnan was by a judgment by two judges of the Supreme Court, Swiss timing by one, Ayaswamy was again by two. So Ayaswamy could not, in normal parlance, overrule Radhakrishnan as per incurium. So Justice Sikri writes, he says, although Swiss timing is right in saying that it is per incurium, Swiss timing could not have said it, because in Section 11, you are not exercising jurisdiction of a court. So you cannot go into per incurium and such other things and hold it as per incurium. You are exercising a designates function. You are not per se exercising a function as a judicial body under Section 2(1). So therefore, the judgment in Commonwealth Games, Swiss timing versus Commonwealth Games, is not a binding precedent. He says, but still, Radhakrishnan was bad law. Then they try to dilute Radhakrishnan. So what he says is, Radhakrishnan is an authority for where there are serious allegations of fraud, which go to the root of the matter. And when he says what goes to the root of the matter, he says which goes to the root of the arbitration agreement. Now, if something goes to the root of the arbitration agreement, then it becomes something, it becomes non-arbitrable. And then if it is if it is an issue which goes into REM, in the sense which affects third parties as well, or if fraud affects parties outside of the arbitration agreement, then that is, it's an in rem issue and not an in personam issue, then the matter cannot be referred to arbitration. So basically, two tests were laid out. One is that please see if it goes to root of the agreement, that is whether the agreement itself is vitiated by fraud. If that is the case, then the court can go into it. No, but then if I seek a declaration, effectively what one would interpret using Sikri's judgment is, if I seek a declaration that the agreement is not valid, then if I make serious allegations relating to that, which go into the root, and if the court prima facie under Section 8 finds that, it becomes a non-arbitral. And here I want to go back again to Booz Allen. What Justice Ravindran held in Booz Allen is, in Section 11, the scope of interference is very limited. Why the scope of interference is very limited is because ultimately you're appointing an arbitrator, and whoever is the arbitrator you're appointing, that person will pass an award, and that award you can challenge under Section 34 saying that it is vitiated by fraud. But in a civil suit, you're ousting the person from that civil suit, because under Section 8, if I refer you to arbitration, then the problem that you face is that you go to arbitration and there again you allege fraud, you say Section 34 and the award gets vitiated, then again you have to come and file a civil suit in respect of whatever remedy that you were originally seeking. So this is an anomaly. So therefore Section 8, they put a higher threshold. So now you read Booz Allen in context with Ayaswamy. What is that you get? It is possible to say that if I file a declaratory suit, that there is no arbitration, that there is no agreement, that declaratory suit would still stand the muster of Section 8 and the reference to arbitration. Because the language of Section 8 saying no prima facie arbitration agreement, if I'm able to prima facie make out that there is no, that there is fraud in the making of the agreement. And here I will go to Section 17 of the Indian Contract Act, and under Section 17, I'll make that argument. So if I make that argument under Section 17, the court will have to then look into, okay, is there allegations of fraud made out, and is it prima facie made out, and on that basis refer the matter or not refer the matter to arbitration. Here's where we come to Chandrachud's judgment, and that is the game changer. He passed a concurring judgment. he basically did a Control F on the Arbitration and Conciliation Act and to find out where is this word fraud coming. Is there at all a word fraud in the Arbitration Act? He traced it to explanation 1 to section 34B subclause 2. And he said, explanation says where the award or the making of the award is induced by fraud or corruption. Please mark this language. Where the making of the award was induced by fraud or corruption, then the award would need to be set aside. He then also went into the genesis of arbitrability, which is the subject matter of the dispute must be non-arbitrable. He said he traced fraud to a public policy exception, but he accepted what was said in Booz Allen, and he said, look, there is a subject matter. If you want an exclusion from the subject matter of arbitration, then it should be either by a special statute or it should be at the plea of fraud. Now, if just by pleading fraud, you cannot avoid arbitration. He traced it from international commentaries and he said that it should be fraud going to the root of the agreement and not relating to fraud in the performance of the agreement. Please mark this distinction. This is very critical. Fraud which goes to the root of the agreement means in the very making of the contract, when two parties are joined together by a contract, that joining must be based on fraud. It cannot be that after joining, there are disputes between the parties, and those disputes are because of fraudulent acts committed by one person or the other. So he said, if that is the case, that will fall outside the exception of subject matter of arbitration, and it would still be arbitrable. He also said something very critical. He said that the intent of the act is that fraud is to be examined at the stage of section 34. That is why you find it in section 34. Therefore, only after the award is made, you look at fraud. You don't look at fraud before that. Now, this is very crucial because we were all along, the debate was on whether the matter can be referred to arbitration or not under section 8 and under section 11. Now, then there was another judgment, Rashid Raza versus Sadaf Akhtar. This was a judgment in 2019 which clarified Ayaswamy and said that there are two tests. One is that the plea for fraud must permeate the entire contract, including the arbitration agreement, or it should be allegation of fraud which is not touching only upon the functioning of the party, but must have a implication in the public domain. So assuming that there is a fraud by which a third party is affected. If a third party is affected by that fraud, then the matter cannot be referred to arbitration because it becomes an in rem issue. And here we trace it again back to Booz Allen. The debate, but then the ghost of Radhakrishnan still remained. Radhakrishnan was never overruled. It was not cited as bad law. Everybody tried to clarify Radhakrishnan and, run around, tiptoe around Radhakrishnan. This changed on August 19th, 2020. On that day, two judgments, both rendered by Justice Nariman came. One was the judgment of Avital Post Studios versus HSBC PI Holding. Now, this was a case. What had happened was, Avital, I'm sure some of you would have heard of this movie Bunty or Bubbly. So in Bunty or Bubbly, what happens is Abhishek Bachchan and Rani Mukherjee, they go to a Gora and they tell him, he says, I want Taj Mahal. When he says, I want Taj Mahal, they say, no, we cannot sell it to you. We will rent it out to you for one day. So they basically commit one massive fraud on him and they tell him that we will rent the Taj Mahal for one day. And he comes there and with his bride to get married at Taj Mahal, and then he realizes he's been made a fool of. Now, Avital did a similar thing. It convinced this HSBC that BBC has crores and crores of footage which they are going to convert from 2D to 3D. And they're in the process of finalizing a contract with BBC in this regard. So we need money from you to buy the equipment. Without those equipment, we'll not be able to do anything. And we will earn 1 billion in profit over 10 years. Trust us. So on the basis of that representation, they entered into a contract. They got a huge chunk of money. The entire chunk of money that they got, they spread it between their own sister companies. Here, there, everywhere, they spread the money. Now, after some time, this HSBC realizes that there was no such contract with BBC, and BBC was not even thinking about it. So then they didn't know what to do. They invoked arbitration. They said, you fraudulently misrepresented and induced us to enter into a contract. By inducing us to enter into a contract, you have committed fraud on us. And they sought for the entire money back and damages and so on and so forth. They said, we've invested so much amount of time, so much amount of money. We've promised this much amount of return to our investors, everything they asked. They also filed a criminal case in Mumbai. That criminal case which they filed in Mumbai was closed, giving a B report. B report is essentially that no case is made out, against which HSBC filed a protest. Protest was rejected. Matter was carried out in writ petition. This is where it was when the matter was in Supreme Court. The arbitrator, on the other hand, he held that there was misrepresentation on part of Avital. Because of that misrepresentation, HSBC invested. So therefore, the entire money invested by HSBC has to be returned along with interest, along with costs of arbitration and few other damages. Now, in India, if you want to enforce a foreign award, you need to file an application under Section 48 seeking enforcement of that. Now, by the time your Section 48 is decided, the other party can siphon off its assets, do 101 other things. So what typically people do is they also file a Section 9 application seeking enforcement of that arbitral award in an indirect manner. They say, get me security for the assets. So under Section 9, they ask for attachment before attachment, because there's already a foreign award, and because there's a foreign award, there's every chance that he's going to run away. So therefore, attaches property. So it's a standard practice which is followed throughout, and I will give you more instances of how it is done at another level altogether. Now, here Radhakrishnan was cited. Law Commission report was cited saying, look, they wanted to amend the law. A Law Commission recommended, and Law Commission's recommendation was to overrule Radhakrishnan was not taken. So therefore, Radhakrishnan is still good law. And he said, I.S. Swamy is wrong law, because I.S. Swamy did not consider what was said in Radhakrishnan and what was said by the Law Commission. The Law Commission recommended this, and this was not considered. And they referred to an English judgment which said that, well, there was a recommendation by a Law Commission and that is not considered. That becomes an interpretative aid to arrive at a conclusion that it is that the legislature intended the effect of Radhakrishnan to stay. They also argued that there's a criminal proceeding and there's a civil proceeding. So in the criminal proceeding, if I'm held to be not guilty, can you then convict me? Can you then award the judgment against me? So they are parallel proceedings. Justice Nariman stuck everything down. He said, sorry, civil and criminal proceedings are different and they have no bearing. He cited a number of judgments to arrive at that. Then he said, sorry, your argument on Section 16 doesn't apply, because I.S. Swamy lays down correct law and it's already been confirmed by Rashid Raza versus Sadaf Akhtar, which is a 3-judgment judgment. So therefore, I'm not going to accept your argument on I.S. Swamy. He then went on to hold that even if there's fraud in the making of the contract, that can be gone into by the arbitrator. So I.S. Swamy said fraud which goes to the making of the contract. Here he said fraud which goes into the making of the contract is also arbitrable, and the arbitrator has the jurisdiction to hold that it is made. It is that the dispute is not that the contract is void. To say that the contract is void, also the arbitrator has jurisdiction. This is a path-breaking point of law. And it is actually a very well-recognized point of law, starting from House of Lords in the 19th century in Anisminic Corporation. Jurisdiction to decide includes the jurisdiction to say, I don't have jurisdiction. So the arbitrator has that power to say that the contract itself is void. And he has the power to order restitution. Now, if the contract itself is void, how does he get the power to order restitution? Because the arbitration agreement is separate and severable. That was the argument, and that was the proposition of law which was said. Ultimately, they said that even if there is impersonation, there is false representation, there is diversion of fraud, all of which leading to a criminal offense. Your criminal offense is separate and distinct, and Booz Allen must be read down to that effect. Then he said that as long as they have no public flavor, whether they are voidable or not has to be decided by arbitration. So therefore, the proposition of law that Avital laid down was that even fraud which goes to the root of the agreement can be gone into unless and until there is a public flavor involved. Now, on the same day, Justice Nariman passed another judgment in Deccan Paper Mills versus Regency Mahavir, where he cited Avital, because Avital was a two-judge bench judgment. Two-judge could never overrule Radhakrishnan. So in the three-judge bench judgment, which was actually also on a Section 8 application, but that was relating to Section 31 of the Specific Relief Act as to whether a document can be cancelled, can be ordered to be cancelled in an arbitration. So there he laid down two propositions. One, he said Radhakrishnan has no legs to stand. And as a precedent, it has no value. He didn't overrule it per se, but he says it had no value. Second thing he said, that you have to, argument of fraud can only be taken if you plead that the agreement was not entered at all. If the agreement is entered, but it is entered by fraud, then it is arbitrable. But if the agreement is not entered at all, then you can plead that and you can try and establish that. Basically to say it is not my signature, I have never signed this document. That argument is still available to you. But if you say that agreement was an outcome of fraud, that you are not going to succeed. So basically, this exorcised the ghost of Radhakrishnan. Fraud became arbitrable. Now let's just summarize our journey. First, Radhakrishnan said, if you allege fraud, then it was not arbitrable. So any type of fraud became non-arbitrable. Then, if fraud gives rise to a criminal offense, then it's not arbitrable, said Booz-Allen. Then fraud which goes to the root of the matter and making of the agreement becomes non-arbitrable. And fraud involving third parties became non-arbitrable. Then, even if a person is guilty of inducing another to enter into a contract, or fraud or forgery or criminal cases filed against such person, even then an award obtained against such person is arbitrable, said Avital. Everything here is focused on the contractual aspect and Section 17 of the Indian Contract Act. This is because we were tracing fraud to whether the subject matter of the dispute was capable of adjudication by arbitration. But as identified by Chandrachud, fraud in arbitration was actually to be adjudicated in a Section 34 relating to the making of the award. We spent a decade trying to unravel Radhakrishnan. And we answered that fraud is arbitrable, but we did not address the effect of fraud in an arbitral award. This is addressed in explanation 1 to Section 34B. So before we go into that, I must take you back to 3 events I said have a bearing. I was talking about a letter dated 7th January 2009 written by Ramling Raju. This Ramling Raju was of Satyam, and he wrote a letter saying that we've fudged the accounts of Satyam. And the accounts that we've fudged of Satyam, the figure, Satyam is not financially that good. And there are some problems underlying with Satyam, and I tried to repair it. Nobody else is responsible, so on and so forth. This sent ripples across the country. Even in US, suits were filed, allegations were made left, right, and center. Central government took over the company. Ultimately, it was sold to Tech Mahindra. Now, how does this have a bearing on fraud and arbitration? For this, we have to go back a little before, to the year 2000. Satyam signed an agreement with a company called Venture Global, which was based in Michigan. They were supposed to give certain software services to various companies which were based out of, which were based in the US area. And these things, what they wanted to do, there were certain commissions which had to be paid to Satyam and so on and so forth. There were disputes between the parties in 2005. Those disputes with the parties were referred to an arbitrator in 2006 who rendered an award. The award rendered in 2006 basically said that the joint venture company which was formed between Venture and Satyam, the shares of that joint venture company has to be returned to Satyam at a very minimal valuation. And it also said that you must refer the parties to, you must pay compensation for whatever losses which Satyam has faced. In addition to that, it also said that pay costs of arbitration. Now, this was a foreign award. What Satyam did very smartly is it went to US, because Venture is based out of US, went to US and sought to enforce it. What Venture did even more smartly is they went to Hyderabad and they filed a suit in Hyderabad seeking a declaration that the arbitral award is void because of the reason that it is in violation of the FEMA guidelines. FEMA guidelines, according to them, was that shares of a company could not be sold at less than fair value, and such thing would amount to importation of foreign, exporting foreign money into that country and so on and so forth. So there's some foreign exchange violations were alleged, and a suit was filed. That suit which was filed, ultimately a petition was filed that it's not maintainable, trial court held it's maintainable, high court held it's not, matter came up to Supreme Court, and that was Venture 1. Where Supreme Court said you have to treat it as an application under Section 34 and a suit is maintainable, and remanded the matter back. Ultimately, Venture was overruled in Balco versus Kaiser. That's another story, and very interesting story at that, maybe for another day. But once this happened, the suit filed by Venture got converted to a Section 34. Came 2009 and Ramling Raju's confessions to the world, which resulted in prosecution by SEBI, which resulted in hundreds of other issues. At this point in time, Venture filed an amendment application in the Section 34. The amendment application which they filed was to say that, look here, there is a clause in the agreement which Venture and Satyam entered into. That clause in the agreement was essentially that both parties are solvent, but please see the confession letter of 2009 written by Ramling Raju. He says we've been fudging the account since 2002. So therefore, when he entered into the agreement with me, his representation was false. Because his representation was false, the making of the contract was by fraud. Because the making of the contract was by misrepresentation and fraud, the arbitral award automatically goes by virtue of explanation 1 to subsection B of subsection 32 to B2. I'll extract the sections and send it across through Vikas at a later point in time when you want to review it. But so here, the High Court said that, look, Section 34, you are supposed to file within 90 days. If you don't file within 90 days, you lose your right to file Section 34. So therefore, how can you amend and add an entirely new ground into Section 34? Such an amendment would be barred by limitation. Now, by the time High Court decided, the matter came up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court had already decided Section 34 can be amended in certain cases where the certain information was not available and so on and so forth. There are certain exceptions. So Satyam argued an entirely different point, and that added is the reason why we're going to see in the next 5 drastic judgments on fraud. Argued by Harish Salve, he said, please see explanation 1 is fraud which leaves of the arbitral award. Therefore, it is federal proceedings and not outside the arbitration proceedings. Therefore, this amendment is beyond the scope of Section 34. A 34 court cannot go into this. Now, that's a very good argument. Supreme Court did not agree. Supreme Court said fraud is of infinite hues and infinite colors. It can be any kind of fraud. We are not going to restrict interpretation of explanation 1 to say fraud is only during fraud of arbitral proceedings. If so, it should have said so in so many words. Any event which has a causal link to the making of the arbitral award, which is affected by fraud or corruption, is a ground on which the award can be set aside. So therefore, we will allow the amendment. They allowed the amendment. Now, this finding was given in 2010, exactly at the time when Radhakrishnan was decided. But you will find, surprisingly, from Radhakrishnan, all the judgments that I told you, none of them refer to this. Because those were judged on arbitrability. And this was relating making of award. So, now we have a situation in 2010 itself, the law is laid down that fraud type can go into. Now what happened? During the course of 8 years, ultimately Venture 34, trial court allowed it. Trial court said, yes, that letter was a misrepresentation, is a proof of misrepresentation into account. High Court said, sorry, there is no basis to presume that. There is no evidence led by the parties. When there is no evidence led by the parties onto the fraud, how can you assume fraud? Matter came, and in 2018, the matter was heard by Justices Abhay Manohar Sapre and Justice Chalmeshwar. They gave two different opinions. Justice Sapre said that yes, the letter of 7th January 2009 is a notorious fact and a court can take cognizance of it. The effect that it has arbitration on the agreement. So if it can take cognizance of it and the effect that it has, then on the strength of it, the award can be set aside. Justice Chalmeshwar said, sorry, that is not correct. First and foremost, please show me where have you pleaded it? Where have you pleaded the exact impact of that agreement has had on you? Where have you laid evidence on it? Without any evidence, without any proper pleading, how do you presume these things? Sorry, that's not correct. So because of the disagreement between them, the matter has been referred to 3 judges and the matter is pending. It was last listed in August, and of course, because of the pandemic, it's not going to be taken on. Now, does this mean that the story of fraud ends here? No, it doesn't. There's an even more interesting story. And that is from my city, Bangalore. Bangalore is the headquarters of ISRO. And ISRO had been allotted some S-band frequency. Now, it had not used certain frequencies, so it was ultimately transferred to Department of Telecommunications because Department of Space couldn't use it. So ISRO wanted to use it. ISRO didn't know how to use it. So it consulted certain people. There was a person called Forge Advisors, which consisted of ISRO alumni, and they went to that person, a person called Vishwanathan. He said, let us form a joint. You prepare the satellite, you launch satellite in that satellite band frequency, you lease that S-band frequency to us. We will give and we will pay you a license fee for every year. We'll pay you a certain amount of money. This happened in 2005. This agreement was ultimately entered into in 2005. So once this agreement was entered into, a joint venture company, initially the plan was to form a joint venture company. Ultimately, it was a standalone company called Devas Multimedia. It was a company which was also incorporated in Bangalore. Now, there was an agreement into between the parties, and under the agreement entered into between the parties, there was a license fee, etc., and so on and so forth, which had to be paid. Everything was as per procedure. Antrix was supposed to build the satellites. There were some delays according to them. This is when Dr. S. Radhakrishnan enters the picture in 2009. When he enters the picture, complaints are made that there are large-scale irregularities in allotment of S-band frequency. The 2G judgment came in 2012, but the ripples of that was being felt even then. So Radhakrishnan says, let us examine as to whether the agreement has been validly entered into. They find that the agreement is validly entered into. These facts, what I'm stating, I will clarify, are from the award, which I found online. So these are the actual stated in the award, and there may be facts which I may miss out. So please ignore that because there's a story, there's a reason why I'm coming to this. So Devas obtains investments from various VCs. These VCs form a company in Mauritius, and through Mauritius, they invest into Devas Multimedia India Limited. Devas also enters into an agreement with Deutsche Telekom, which is based in Germany, for further investment and for strategic services. Now, when all of this was happening, Radhakrishnan writes to the Union government and says, please tell me how to annul this deal. Because everybody was making allegations, newspaper reports were coming, mostly the Hindu made allegations that there were large-scale irregularities and so on and so forth. So he wrote saying, please tell me how to annul the deal. When he wrote saying, please tell me how to annul the deal, the matter ultimately was taken to the Cabinet Subcommittee on Cabinet Committee and Security, and in 2011, they annulled the deal. So Antrix wrote a letter saying, force major boss, the union wants it for army, the union wants S-band frequency for other things. So therefore, we will not be able to use it, or we will not use it to use. So therefore, the substratum of the agreement is gone. We have terminated it. Devas initiated arbitration. It went to ICC. Initially, in Bangalore, a Section 9 was filed to avoid the arbitration. Ultimately, in Supreme Court also, Antrix lost and they went and participated in the arbitration. In the arbitration, an award was made against Antrix, saying that it has to pay the amount of investment that Devas has made into the entire project. Now, simultaneously in Mauritius, under the Indo-Mauritius bilateral treaty, a arbitration was initiated in which also Indian government was found to be at fault. And in Germany, Deutsche Telekom initiated another arbitration under the Indo-German bilateral treaty, in which also it found Indian government to be harmed, but then wrong, but the quantum of damages was not fixed. In the meanwhile, CBI investigated and found large-scale irregularities in the allotment and corruption in the allotment and entering into this agreement. And they filed a charge sheet, charge sheeting several scientists from ISRO and 2 directors from Devas. So in the meanwhile, what Devas did was Devas filed a second application before the Delhi court seeking for deposit of the money. By this time, already Antrix had filed a section 34 in Bangalore. Now, these were the times before, it had filed it just before the 2015 amendment. 2015 amendment, as everybody will recollect, was the amendment which, pardon me, I will be exceeding the time limit of 1 hour. I just need another 10 minutes or 15 minutes more. So what happened here is section 34 is pending and the Amendment Act of 2015 comes. The Amendment of Act of 2016 amends section 36 to say that from 26th November 2015, and I think if I'm not wrong, the section 34 application in Bangalore was filed on 19. Section it enforceable, or you'll have to deposit for hearing. Earlier there was an automatic stay. That automatic stay went away and you had to deposit. Under 36(1) you had to make an application for stay of the award and you had to deposit a certain amount of money. So BCCI versus Kochi, Justice Nariman held that this is not prospective. This applies back to all pending proceedings as well. So therefore, if there was a section 34 which was pending, in that section 34 also you would have to necessarily deposit the money and you'll have to make an application for stay. So here's where we are at. So 2019 amendment comes. In the 2019 amendment, they add a section 87. That section 87 says that it applies only for arbitrations. It is declared that the 2015 amendment applies only for arbitrations, which commence after, or the awards which are passed after the 2015 amendment. This is challenged in Hindustan Constructions versus Union of India directly before the Supreme Court. Supreme Court holds that section 87 is unconstitutional and it says all awards you have to necessarily make a deposit. There's another judgment that also incidentally of Justice Nariman. In CPC there was a provision that the government doesn't need to deposit any money. That was held to be not applicable in the case of section 36 application for stay. Now, in this time, what is happening is section 34 is pending. That is not being argued because Devas is insisting that the jurisdiction is in Delhi. The single judge of the Delhi High Court says, yes, the jurisdiction is in Delhi, and asks the Bangalore matter. Bangalore matter has no jurisdiction. Matter goes to division bench. Division bench in 2018 held that the Bangalore court has jurisdiction. So now Devas has filed an SLP in the Supreme Court. And in the SLP in the Supreme Court, they obtain a stay of the section 34 proceedings. Now in New York, in Washington, they go and file a suit for enforcement of the award. On 29th of October 2020, the US court says that Indian government has to pay $1.2 billion to Devas. Antrix immediately files an IA before the Supreme Court. And that IA is basically to stopping Devas from enforcing that US judgment. Matter comes up before the Chief Justice of India and 2 other brother judges on 4th of November. When the matter comes up on 4th of November, they say, and this is something which is very important for you to remember, that section, what was argued by Mr. K.K. Venugopal, the Attorney General of India, was that he said Union of India has discovered a series of fraud in the entire transactions leading up to the disputes, including the arbitration agreement. So therefore, we are not ready for mediation. We are not ready for settlement. We want the matter to be heard. And Supreme Court says it is extremely inequitable for Devas when there's a Section 34 pending and when they've obtained a stay of the Section 34 proceedings to go before another court and seek enforcement of the judgment there. So therefore, that was not correct on part of Devas to do, and they restrained Devas from implementing it. But they transferred the Section 34 proceedings from Bangalore to Delhi, and they asked the Delhi High Court to decide on the stay application in the Section 34 application. They asked it to be decided on stay. And this is how, and they posted the matter for final hearing on 25th of November, day after tomorrow. The matter is coming up. Whether it will be heard or not is a different matter. But on the same day, on 4th of November, the Union of India passes an ordinance, and that ordinance amends Section 36. How does it amend Section 36? It says that provided further that where the court is satisfied prima facie that the arbitration agreement or the contract which is the basis of the award or the making of the award was induced or affected by fraud or corruption, it shall stay the award unconditionally pending disposal of the challenge under Section 34 to the award. So Section 34 was not an automatic stay, but now if it prima facie finds that there is fraud in the making of the arbitration agreement itself, then the matter can be, and then there's no need to pay any amount, and unconditional stay of Section 34 can be obtained. Now, why is this amendment important? Look at the situation where we are at. There are tenders called by government departments under various means, and there may be corrupt practices which may result in formation of tenders. Excuse me. Now, those corrupt practices result in an order, an arbitral award, and you seek to enforce that arbitral award. If you restrict the grounds to only the arbitration agreement, you're looking at a situation where, assuming a criminal case is filed, and in that criminal case that person is convicted, he will still enjoy the fruits of the award. So you're at a situation where he's going to enjoy the fruits of the award as well as get convicted in a criminal case. The contrary is also possible, that the award may be set aside on fraud and he may not even be convicted. Now let's just take a step back and see what is happening here. In international commercial arbitration, it is possible to easily initiate proceedings against and seek enforcement of an arbitral award under all situations. Now, if you can, and you can seek it in all jurisdictions. Wherever I have an asset, you can go and seek an attachment there. How do I stop you? I cannot stop you. If I am a Reliance or I am another company who has assets everywhere, Indian Oil has assets in various countries. So many PSUs have, State Bank of India has branches everywhere. Now you obtain an award against me. I file you will not seek enforcement of it in here. You will just seek enforcement elsewhere. So then it becomes a problem for me. I'll have to challenge the award there, or I'll have to file some proceedings for challenge, and then on the basis of that try to get an order. And in the meanwhile, you seek enforcement elsewhere. I'm put in a problematic situation. So if this is a broader issue, but then let's just focus on fraud. Assuming you have committed fraud, or I have committed fraud, and because of that, you have suffered an arbitral award. You have every right to raise it as held in Venture 2. Now, what you will raise as a ground until that is decided, should I enjoy the fruits of the award? You don't want me to enjoy the fruits of the award. That is why this ordinance has come into effect. Although I saw a few comments and places saying that it's focused mostly on ISRO, but it is not. There's another interesting facet to this amendment. Section 34, explanation 1, which I read, was only relating to making of the arbitral award. It didn't say anything about the arbitration agreement. So they brought in arbitration agreement here. Now, if arbitration agreement you want to bring in, can the fraud in the making of the arbitration agreement be gone into? and fraud which is not on the record of the arbitral tribunal. Now, here's again something which the government has overlooked, and this is very critical. Section 34, before the 2019 amendment said, Section 34(1) said, if a party furnishes proof that it was either under some incapacity, or it was on the basis of some other information that it could not, there was no valid arbitration agreement. Now, 2019 amendment, they changed it. If a party shows on the record of the arbitral tribunal. So therefore, on the record of the arbitral tribunal, if I have not shown that the arbitration agreement was vitiated by fraud, and this I can say because I've seen the award in Anthrix versus Devas, that the argument of fraud was not taken in Anthrix versus Devas. So therefore, the ground under 34(1) is not available. So when the ground under 34(1) is not available to look into the arbitration agreement, the question that arises is, can I look into the arbitration agreement under the explanation 1, which says fraud resulting in the making of the arbitral award. Making of the arbitral award, does it even include the arbitration agreement? It is definitely possible to argue that, because the causal link is required to be shown, and the causal link can definitely be shown, and subsequent facts can definitely be pleaded. For example, a charge sheet which is filed against ISRO employees and Devas directors can be a ground for stay of the arbitral award, because it prima facie says, if a court has taken cognizance, it prima facie says that there is some element of fraud. But is prima facie really enough? Should there be a conviction? Should you look into any other aspect? This is a very problematic issue. And civil and criminal proceedings will go parallelly. Criminal may take much amount of time. By the time the award is already enforced and then you're convicted in the criminal case, you can't go back again. Can you? That's another question which requires to be answered. Venture 4, which is going to be Venture Global 4, which is going to be the 3-judge bench judgment, which is going to decide on that aspect of what should be the element of fraud, what is the standard of proof you look at, how should it be proved. All of those things Venture 4 will look into. And whether a criminal case will have a bearing on Section 34 or not is what ISRO versus Anthrix will look into. There is one common factor in both these judgments. The lawyer for Venture Global was Mr. K.K. Venugopal, and the lawyer for Anthrix is also Mr. K.K. Venugopal. So this one man is going to play a huge role in the next year or two to arrive at what is fraud, and what he is going to help the court arrive at, assist the court as an officer of the court to arrive at, is going to tell us how fraud and arbitration are going to spend another decade moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay. We do not know how Mr. K.K. Venugopal would put the things forward, but at least for 1 hour, we know that you captivated everyone. And as they say, as a good lawyer, everyone captivates, not only the normal lawyers who are in the courtroom. And that's what I was hearing yesterday, your Chief Justice speaking, that the only difference between the physical court and the virtual court is that one will not be able to learn the nuances which one learns during the physical court by observing someone, because in a virtual court, everybody doesn't get that moments to be captured. As on time, we have only one question, and that too is a hypothetical. Since it's a long one, yet send a separate message. I'm posting into the chat box. Just examine it.
Yeah. Party A, arbitration clause in the main business agreement. Party would like to invoke some cases in the Indian court and signs an MOU in which it's clearly mentioned that nothing prior and after this will stand. This MOU and the pendency of those cases. Party A invokes arbitration outside of India in which Party B does not participate, takes an award against Party B. It is proved at the stage of awarded that as per the instructions of Party A, that the award must be set aside. Party A again got an arbitrator appointed from the court in his country and not in India. Arbitration proceedings are not participated by Party B. An award is passed against Party B. Whether this award is valid. So there are a lot of connected questions here. So I'll just address everything. First and foremost, what you should look at an award is valid unless and until it is set aside under the grounds which are mentioned in 48 of the Arbitration Act, because if it's a New York Convention award, then section 48 would apply. Now here, BALCO made it prospective. So all agreements which were signed after 2012, BALCO judgment will apply. So therefore, if it's an agreement prior to 2012, then you could file a section 34 even in Bangalore. I mean, I'm sorry, wherever you are in, you could file a section 34. But now after BALCO, you cannot file it. Now, assuming you say that there is an agreement where you've said that nothing prior to this will stand and only the MOU will stand, then the dispute is necessarily non-arbitrable, because the MOU makes it clear that all other disputes are settled. So therefore, any dispute on which the court passes an award which is covered by the arbitration agreement, covered by the MOU, would necessarily be outside the scope of arbitrability. So therefore, it cannot be implemented because it is not arbitrable. But then that's a point you will have to argue, and you will have to show to the court that that it is outside the scope of the arbitration agreement, because an arbitration agreement will only go into disputes under the MOU and not those outside of the MOU which were settled by virtue of the MOU. So that is the answer.
Yeah. I will just check it out. Because of the chat box, we don't have any questions. If we have on the Facebook.
No problem. I hope.
This
is a very complicated area of law. I hope that I try to make it as simple as possible and try to connect everything as much as possible, because it is a very complicated area of law.
That's true. That's what, when we were discussing about, I told you that it's a very niche area actually.
Yes.
Yeah. So we don't have any questions except full gaga about the way you have presented it. So to all the friends who have connected us on the Facebook as well as on this platform, on their behalf, I thank Ajay Nandidike, who has expressed as we were discussing, a quite weaving session in a weaving manner. I would say he kept us all knitted in that weaving session, and we all enjoyed the way he expressed. And tomorrow, in the continuation of our sessions, tomorrow we would be having a session of keys to multi-skilling, and that would be by Mr. P.M. Bhardwaj, a national motivational speaker, coupled with Bhupendra Tayal. So do stay connected with us at 4 p.m. And those who have missed us, they can always watch us on the YouTube channel of Beyond Law CLC. This video would also be uploaded. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, stay blessed. Namaskar and Jai Hind. Thank you, Ajay.
Thank you.
Yeah.